Hello and welcome, I'm Danny the Dev, and welcome to my little corner of the internet where I love to talk about games. Now, if you haven't been living under a rock recently, you'll know about my game of choice today, Lethal Company, the early access roguelike that's taken the internet by storm. And for good reason. The game is not only incredibly fun, but manages to balance a relaxed atmosphere where you mess around with your friends, with a tense one where you're all alone and you just want to escape your own skin. For those of you who don't know the game, you and up to 3 friends play as new recruits for the company, and must venture to dangerous planets to get scrap. Basically, Capitalism Simulator 20XX edition. It's a great game to play with friends, so if you're looking for something new, I'd highly recommend it. Now, the game is still in early access, and in some ways, it really shows. The game feels like a relatively complete experience, especially for its low price tag, and it's mostly bug-free. But there's still plenty of room to expand upon what's already there, turning this game into a near-endless stream of enjoyable moments for players. So today, I'd like to take a moment of your time and explain some of my own ideas for how to turn this game from good to one of the all-time great party games. Now, when it comes to expanding outwards, the structure of the game is very important. What does a general playthrough of the game look like? What should it look like? Currently, that structure is very simple. Find scrap for quota, get a new quota, repeat until can't reach quota. I like this as a basic idea. It's simple, it's easy to understand, and it's pretty easily developed upon, I feel. Many games have different modes that expand upon the structure in different ways, and I think multiple modes would really benefit this game. Let's start with the easiest, endless mode. This is basically how the game already is. Keep going until you can't make quota, then start over. I'd love to spice this up a little bit by giving players rewards for subsequent playthroughs, mostly in the form of extra credits to spend based on their rank, their experience level, and highest quota met. This would just make it easier to get through the first few quotas to keep things more interesting for veteran players. But when I hear about the overall structure of the game, I feel most people are eager for some kind of ending. Now, we could do the easy thing and just make it so an ending comes after a certain number of quotas, but that doesn't feel right to me. It feels a bit lazy and cheap. I'd much prefer to mix up the gameplay a bit, have the players take on various challenges that they wouldn't find in endless mode, have the game slowly open up a bit at a time, while still using the 3 trips to make quota framework. For example, your first 3 trips could be experimentation, assurance, and then vow in succession with no weather conditions. The second quota could use those same 3 planets, but randomized with rainy weather. As you get to later quotas, the game can add new planets to the randomizer, add weather effects to the older planets, and even have strange enemy variety, such as exploring a planet with just dozens of loot bugs. The possibilities are endless. As a side note, the story mode would need a checkpoint system at the beginning of each quota, just to not make it unfair. Over the course of the story, the players uncover more clues about the company, as well as how to get inside the main building. This leads to a suitable finale where the players can finally explore the company building inside the walls, searching for information to take out, and maybe even explosives to place at key points with the intention of finishing the company once and for all. Finally, we could add challenge mode, expanding on the different obstacles presented in the story mode. Take on increasingly difficult challenges in an endless quota run until everything is just tightened with eclipse. Next, let's talk about some mechanical changes I'd like to see. Now, I admit many of these come from existing mods, but I'd really like to see them in the base game. First is yippee bugs. I just like them. For real, the first thing I'd like is a compass to help with navigation. This would make it less likely to get completely lost without giving too much to the players to make navigation trivial. Getting fully lost is an experience that stops being scary and quickly becomes frustrating, and a compass could definitely help with that. Also in mods are the extra item slots that are dedicated to the torch and the walkie-talkie. These are very useful items, and it sucks to have to give up loot spots for them. Make them a bit heavier to compensate, but these slots are so nice to have. The other mod is the bigger group size. The base game supports up to 4 players, but with mods you can have up to 32 players without much trouble. So why not implement this? Just make the game a bit bigger and a bit harder for more players? Done and done. My final mechanical idea is one of my own design. At the end of each day, the game gives certain titles to each player, so you got the most profitable, the the laziest, most paranoid, most injuries, I think it would be a very fun idea to give minor buffs depending on the titles given. So, for example, if most profitable means you're less weighed down, most paranoid you get higher run speed, most injuries you get more health, and laziest, well, maybe laziest doesn't get anything. It'll make the buffs really small, like 1 to 5%. It would make a nice secret for casual players while also providing a fun little mechanic to optimize for the more serious groups. One of the biggest points of improvements that could be made in Lethal Company is the locations themselves. There are only 2 types of interiors in the game, and one of them is reserved only for the endgame planets, so most playthroughs just involve a lot of walking through the same corridors and walkways. The main industrial interior is very atmospheric, and the winding paths contribute to the feeling of gradually getting more and more lost. But aside from that, and the occasional jump over a bottomless pit, they're not very interactive. I honestly think a lot could be added, not only in terms of the new locations, but to the existing factory setting that could make this game much more enjoyable long term. One of the things that stuck out to me when playing is the lack of ability you have to deal with monsters. Almost every monster has some kind of weakness built in, but those weaknesses can be inconsistent at best, and at worst they can be impossible in tandem with the other monsters. Good luck trying to ward off a bracken while keeping a coil head in place. There is a great way of allowing players to deal with these situations while also adding to both the challenge and the world building by adding in environmental hazards. Now, to borrow from SCP Containment Breach as an example, who remembers that game? We could add in Tesla gates, proximity-triggered areas that blast whatever comes through them with electricity, with a small startup and lengthy cooldown. If they're willing to conserve stamina just a little longer, a player can dash through a Tesla gate, causing a monster chasing them to be stunned for a long period of time, or outright killed if it's weak enough. Of course, players have to be wary of this too, or get electrocuted themselves. You can have trapdoors that give ways to pits, marked with faint outlines and other giveaways such as gear mechanisms within the room. Much like Tesla gates, players can just about make it over by sprinting, and maybe lure slower monsters into it, or use a stun grenade to trap it there so it falls in. My favourite environmental trick though, is the fire alarm. Dotted over the map are buttons that can manually trigger the fire alarm to play for a few seconds, playing a loud siren everywhere in the facility. Players can barely hear anything else, but it disorientates any monster that can hear, allowing players to get away. Of course, each switch can only be used once, but the alarm can be triggered automatically with any flame or explosion. You could even have, like, water sprinklers, which some monsters might try and avoid. Looping back to the point I made about the compass, having some kind of directional indicators would help the flow of the map as well. One-way ledges are a meme in Pokemon, but they work pretty well here, provided you don't get soft-locked. You would have to gauge if it's worth it to drop down when it might be difficult to get back up, or just keep a jetpack or extendable ladder handy. In the same vein, emergency doors or collapsing ceilings could also help push players further in, potentially separating them, or allowing them to put a barrier between them or any monster chasing them. There actually is already an emergency shutter just in front of the main entrance on Experimentation. It's kind of pointless and mostly just serves as a troll. And just as a help to players, toss in the occasional fire escape sign, much like we see in real life. Glowing green signs that clearly point towards the fire exit as a last-ditch effort to help a truly lost player. But now, let's add some full-on new stuff, and let's start with some new locations. These are just some ideas. I don't have the time to fully flesh them out in one video, but if you'd like to see them, I am currently employed, pist wink wink. So I'll go over a few ideas. Starting with a nuclear power plant generating energy for the other facilities on the moon. This would mostly be twisting corridors around a giant central hub made up of large rooms. You have areas to store the nuclear rods which cause gradual damage over time, toxic water, spinning dynamos, and a leaking battery that spews electricity over the room. It's a little cliche, but a military base would be a fine idea too. You've got lookout towers for some vertical level design, and a firing range where you can even hide a gun or two. And finally, a simple cavern system would be an interesting change of pace, if a little boring, getting away from square rooms into more natural but equally claustrophobic rock formations. Finally, I'd like to show you a pair of enemies I think would be great additions to the game. The first one is inspired by, well, okay, ripped from, Prey from 2014, and I am of course talking about the basic Mimic. The Mimic can turn into any item with a sell value and can even be scanned. The only tell that it's a Mimic is that the cost value is in glitchy text when scanned. If the player tries to pick it up, it causes major damage before scurrying off to rebuild its disguise. It can also try a different disguise if it's ignored or attacked. The second is more original. My current working name is the Receiver. It's a pile of flesh fused to an old computer monitor. The gimmick with this enemy is that it's either blind or deaf, and you will only know which through one of two ways. Either baiting it with sound or sight and seeing what it does, or by looking at the monitor, which will faintly display an eye if it can see but can't hear, or a speaker if it can hear but can't see. The kicker, if it manages to kill a player, which it can do in a single hit, it becomes capable of both seeing and hearing, marked by the monitor now having a creepy human face. In conclusion, I think Lethal Company is a tremendous game with a lot of awesome potential. There are so many ideas I could sit down and dream of spinning the game in all kinds of directions. While the aim of this video was mostly just to talk about some cool ideas, it would really make me happy if some of these ideas actually made it into the game. What I'd really like to know though is what you all think. Use that comment section, tell me what you'd like to see, and while you're down there, leave a like and subscribe, it always helps. Who knows, you may get some ideas into the game too, because at the end of the day, I like to think we all have some game dev inside of us. Thanks for watching.